Perhaps you can open your Bibles already as we go to the message before communion. The reason is because the message has a lot to do with communion. To Romans, obviously. We are still in the Romans series. Last week, Shanini preached on Romans 3. Saw a little video of what it looks like when Jesus takes our place and dies for our sins. And today, we're going to continue the journey. Janini emphasized a lot the issue of justification, the fact that we are justified by His blood. Today we're going to have a look at what faith really means, because obviously we are justified by faith through grace. So if you go to Romans chapter 4, and keep that open for yourself, because I'm going to refer to a few verses here and there. And if you can also maybe put something, a little piece of paper. You had a little booklet, you might want to use it to put it there or something. Also in Genesis chapter 12, because I'm going to obviously talk about a story that's related to the Old Testament, as you probably have read from Romans 4. Okay, I'm going to give you a situation. And just imagine it's you. Just imagine that one day you wake up. Just to figure out, let's say you open up your banking app, and all of a sudden you notice that there are millions of dollars deposited on your bank account. What would you do?
Hallelujah.
And you start wondering, like, well, this is not my money. What is it doing there? What would you do? Go to a shopping mall, go on a spending spree, perhaps journey around the world. Who is in favor of that one? Oh, yes, I see that already. Buying your own home. Oh, that's a good one as well, right? Isn't that amazing? Big amount of money. It sounds like a fairy tale, right? Well, it did happen to a man from Melbourne. His name is Matthew Pierce. One morning he woke up. It was even on the news. I think it was last year. He woke up in the morning, he opened his banking app. He was first from the Commonwealth Bank. Apparently they're very commonwealthy. And he was looking and he was looking like, what? $123 million? What on earth is that? So he called his bank manager, obviously, in total, like he didn't know what he was seeing. It's like, listen, I don't understand. There's $123 million on my bank account. So the bank manager had a look at it and said like, oh, sorry, Mr. Pierce, that's a glitch in the system. I'm so sorry about that. Why am I saying this story? It's because, remember what I was saying in the beginning. We're going to talk about justification and justification by faith. When we talk about the fact that God justified us, it sounds a little bit like too good to be true. It's like I just believe and God's grace comes, I turn around and I walk into God's direction and that's it, that's all I need to do. It sounds like a fairy tale. Too good to be true. I used to work for an insurance company, and you know about the insurance companies a long time ago. They always have these little, these little lines and these little tricks just to exclude a couple of things from the policy and everything. And I was writing those policies, so I was really good in the little letters that you think you're covered for something and in the end it was excluded. Well, we think sometimes with justification about faith, something like, what is the catch here? Is there something that I need to do, or is there something perhaps excluded from the whole story? It's amazing, right? Justification by faith. Paul is writing about it in Romans chapter 4. And to understand the context of Romans chapter 4, I'm going to take you on a journey of over 4,000 years. We go back way in time. And we're going to talk about a man that influenced three major world religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. His name is obviously Abraham. Yes. So if you open up your Bibles, you can also just read it on the screen in Genesis chapter 12. I don't know if you have the Bible verse. Yes, there you go. The first three verses, it reads the following. It says this: Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, when God came to Abram and said this, he was 75 years old. He was not the youngest anymore. Now, in those times, people lived a little bit longer than what we're used to right now. It sounds a bit strange to us, but that was reality. But he was 75 years old, and he left his parents' home. Actually, his father had already passed away, and also his brother already died. So he was taking care of his nephew, which was the custom to do. We know his name is Lot, and they go on a journey together with his wife Sarai and Abraham. Back then it was still Abram, not Abraham. I'm going to come to that in a little while. They go on a little trip. They were in Haran, which is modern day Syria, which was in the Fertile Crescent, where people were, planting crops and all of these things. There was a major incident that happened. His father died, Abram's father died, and in that scene, God comes to Abram and says, listen up, you need to leave, you need to go. And they moved down south. They started on a journey, walking, perhaps on a donkey. I don't know how they did it, but they went down south. 75 years old. I remember when God spoke very clearly to Janine and I was 40 years old. I was a bit younger than Abraham. Just to put it into context, he was already quite old. So they went on a journey, and they only got these words, the words that I just read out to you. He didn't even know about this God, really. This was a new encounter. He was coming out actually of a pagan society that believed in many gods and everything, and all of a sudden, perhaps it was an audible voice. I don't know how exactly it happened, but God was speaking to Abraham. They moved down south, and they come into the country of Canaan. Now remember, in those days they didn't have maps, no GPS system, or for me it was really easy to get to Perth. I just sat in an airplane, I got from A to B like this. Well, not like this, it took a little bit longer than that. But in Abraham's case, no map, no signs on the road like Canaan and 300 more kilometers to go, something like that. Nothing like that. So he went out in faith, believing this God is telling me to go, I'm going. He comes into the country of Canaan. And it is in this context that God comes to Abraham again and says, listen up, the country that you're walking in right now, this is the country that I'm going to give to your descendants. They're like, okay, thank you, God. Good to know. And you were talking about being a blessing to all the nations. That means that I will need to have children. So God, can you get on with it? Because I'm already 75 years old. My wife, Sarai, is already 65 years old. We're not the youngest anymore. But nothing. No words. Just a promise. I will bless you. And those that curse you, I will curse them. Don't worry about it, but just go. And that was it. He knew about the blessing and he knew about the place. That was it. But no child yet. A little while passed by. Perhaps a couple of months, perhaps some years. The Bible doesn't exactly say it. And there was famine in the land of Canaan. No food, nothing. That happened every now and then. And obviously Abraham and his wife, they were now again on the crossroads. What am I going to do? This is the place that God promised to us, but there is also famine in the land. What are we going to do? You know what? We're going to go a little bit further down south. And they walked all the way up to Egypt to find food. We remember that his grandson and his great-grandson did the same trip, looking for food. But there were all kinds of strings attached to that one as well, obviously. So Abraham was already thinking, he was already prospering. It was not just Abraham and Sarai anymore. There were probably more people involved in that sense. For sure, Lot. No children yet, but he was already prospering in livestock, in animals, which meant a lot in those days. And just before they entered into Egypt, Abraham is thinking to himself oh, what am I going to do now? Because, I have a very pretty wife. She's really, really beautiful. She's like my princess. Well, that's actually what her name means. Sarai means princess. So he's not what am I going to do? Because if somebody finds out, maybe they get a brilliant idea to take her and I'm in trouble. So he got really, really strategic about his marriage and thought what? Sarai is actually also my half-sister because we do have one parent in common. I will just tell her that she's my sister and then we're all okay. You see how strategic he was getting in about his marriage and everything? They entered into Egypt and as if it's Murphy's Law, like if something could go wrong, it goes wrong. Somebody figured out, oh, hey, there is a very rich man coming. He has a lot of livestock and everything. And look at his wife. Isn't she stunning? And word, spreads really fast. It came to the house of the Pharaoh, let's say the king of that country. And he heard about the whole story. And they're like, you know what? I like that woman over there very much. And he wanted to take that woman, Sarai, for himself. See what happened? Now, God didn't let it come to that point because all kind of plagues came on the household of Pharaoh to the point that he started wondering, like, what is going on with my life? Why is this happening to me? And then the cat was out of the bag and he found out that Sarah was actually not just his sister or his half-sister, but was actually the wife of Abraham. Just imagine it. You could call it a half-truth. You could also call it a half-lie. I mean, you can pick it. You can choose. Isn't that what often happens when we try to help God a little bit? We're tweaking the truth a little bit just into our favor. We're talking about a man of faith, right? That's what Romans 4 is all about. Well, in the beginning, the story goes pretty much like this. Make sense? So the Pharaoh was quite upset with Abraham and said, like, how could you do this to me? Why didn't you just say so? Abraham apparently didn't have a lot of faith back in the beginning. Not at all. The plagues were over. God restored everything. Sarah was returned to her husband, Abraham. And they moved back, together with Lot, back to Canaan. Apparently the famine was all over. And as the livestock started to grow and they started to wonder a little bit for like, oh, we need to have a little bit of space for our animals and everything. The tribe of Lot, the people that were around Lot, and particularly, the shepherds and everything, and the shepherds of Abraham that were taking care of the sheep and cattle and everything, they started having some disputes with each other. Because obviously they needed a lot of space and things were a bit difficult. So Abraham thought like, you know what, I'm going to give my nephew Lot here a choice. So they were probably up on a mountain or something, at least they had a good view of the country. And it's like, Lot, you're my nephew. What do you want to choose? Because apparently we cannot stay together here. It's just too much trouble with our livestock and everything. And Lot was looking. This was a very strange choice because remember, and for instance in a Korean culture, you know that very well. What do? You first give the choice to the older person, not to the younger person. This was very strange actually what was going on here. So Lot was looking at the land and he saw a beautiful plain near the Jordan River and said like, you know what, I want that piece of land. It just happened to be that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, we know all the expressions, Sodom and Gomorrah, that's not a very nice expression. That was also around there, and the people were extremely evil. But he didn't know that. He was just looking at the plain, he was looking at the place, and said like, you know what, I want this for myself. We know the story a little bit, right? It's a little bit of a Sunday school class, very quickly. So Abraham thought like, okay, you go there, I go into the other direction, and God started to multiply and multiply and multiply even more. For Lot though, things didn't turn out very well. He was in an evil city where people were not so kind to each other. And all of a sudden, one of the kings, not of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, but of probably a city nearby, thought it was a good idea to wage war against the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. And they overtook the people. They were taken captive, including Lot and his family. This news came to Abraham, and he thought like, what am I gonna do now? I was a coward in Egypt. I chickened out. I didn't say the truth about my wife. I told her that it was my sister, which was partly true, but also partly not true. But now my nephew is in trouble. What am I gonna do? Well, in those days, people already started to gather around. They were not exactly family, but there were people that were helping out Abraham with his livestock. And other people said like, we can rescue these people. So Abraham took courage and had the faith to like, you know what? I'm going to try this. And they pursued the people that took Lot and his family captive. And they were able to rescue them. You see already a little step in faith here, right? It started with virtually no faith, being very strategic about what you can do with your life decisions. And now already you see him making big progress. It's amazing. We also read that after this story that Abraham said like, okay, what is going to happen now with my life? How are we going to continue with this? Because I'm getting older and older. And, God was promising about a nation. And that means that you need to have a child and everything. But where is the child? So he was looking at one of his servants. And one of his servants was called Eliezer. It means like God is help. Something like that it means. And he thought like, God is help. Come here. Come here, please. God is help. God, I'm old. Sarah is very old. Well, I'm older, but she's also old, and it's going to be really hard for her to get children. What about the family of Eliezer? In that culture, that wasn't a very strange thing. It's like, you know what? Maybe it will come through his line, and, it will be reckoned as if it were my children or my family. And God said like, no. This is not what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you something. So on a night stroll, it's still in the evening. Can you imagine when you're in the desert and everything is really pitch dark, no lights, nothing, and you see the stars at night? Any of you have seen that? My brother Alexander, he used to serve in the army for a couple of months, and he went to Afghanistan. And he told me that that's the most beautiful thing to see. It's pitch dark. You see the stars at night. You can even see the Milky Way and everything. It's just amazing to see. And this was the view that God was starting to show to Abraham. It's like, listen, you see the stars in the sky? Do you see the grains of sand? Which is obviously a lot. I'm going to multiply you beyond your wildest dream that you can never, ever imagine. It's just to enlarge Abraham's vision a little bit. Amazing story, right? We fast forward a little bit more. We already 11 years after he had left Haran to look for another place, and he was still wondering like, where is my little child and everything? It's not happening, and God, where are you? You're talking about a nation, and years went by, and he started thinking like, is this really going to happen? I can relate to that. I can relate to those questions. Sometimes you're waiting for something to materialize in your own life, and it's already hard to wait for 1 year, let alone 11 years. Can you imagine it? So 11 years went by. Abraham is already 86 years old, his wife 10 years younger, and his wife thought like, well, I'm looking at my belly. I don't think I'm going to have children anymore. I think that is already long gone. That's not going to happen. Remember that the family of Abraham, at least the close people around him, they were serving them. And one of the servants was Hagar. Remember that? She was a slave, a servant. And Sarai had this wonderful idea. It's like, I cannot do the job anymore, Abraham. But you can still do the job. Why don't you, with Hagar and everything? And Abraham thought like, well, okay, like I don't think it's going to come anytime soon. And Hagar, soon after that, conceived a child. We know him to be Ismail, and that's obviously the descendants also of people that now profess the Islamic faith. Yeah, so there's the connection. But there was a little detail. God still said that the lineage would be of Abraham, but together with Sarai. So they created themselves a problem there. And that problem became very obvious when Hagar was looking at the shame of Sarai. It's like looking, she doesn't have a child. And she threw that every now and then into her face. And Sarah was really getting fed up with it. Like, I know I made this mistake perhaps. I'm not for sure. But this woman is really annoying me. She's driving me totally crazy. That can sometimes happen, right? And Sarah was looking and begging to Abraham, like, Abraham, can you please send her away with Ismail because I can't stand it anymore. All understandable, perhaps. You see, when we try to help God a little bit in our flesh, where it leads us to sometimes, I think Abraham was thinking already like, maybe I just need to trust God a little bit more than I've been doing so far. Amazing. We continue the story. Now, we see that Abraham was already making several mistakes. Some things he got right. I mean, he did obey and went on a journey, and he even had the courage to help out his nephew. But he also made some major mistakes. It is in this context, and Abraham by now is already 99 years old. So how long are we already in the journey? He started at 75, for those of you that are good at math. How long are we on the way? 24 years. Just think about it. Abraham is 99 years old. His wife is 89 years old. They're not that young anymore. And it is in this context that God comes to Abraham again, and he says something like this. You can read it in Genesis 17, verse 1. It says this: when Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abraham and said to him, I am Almighty God. Walk before me and be blameless. Just think about it. Walk before me and be blameless. I can imagine Abraham revisiting his past a little bit. Like, walk before you and be blameless. Well, okay, I obeyed you when you said go out of Haran and, look for a place and I will bless you. And I was obedient there, but I messed up here and there also quite a bit. I can imagine him doing the checks and balances here a little bit. Don't we all do that sometimes? When God's saying be righteous before me, and you look at yourself and you're be righteous. Yeah, some areas I get it right, but a lot of areas I'm actually a bit ashamed of it in some ways. And it is in this context that the Lord comes and says, walk before me and be blameless. And it is also at this point that Abraham receives circumcision, which was the cutting of the foreskin, as a symbol of the promise that God had made to Abraham many years before, 24 years earlier. Make sense what I'm saying? We nowadays, in Christian circles, we have which ritual, which symbol for that? Called baptism, right? It's a symbol of something that God is already doing by faith in our own hearts. I'm going to come to that in a little while. Time passed by. A little bit of time actually. And all of a sudden they were camping out somewhere probably in the desert or something. And 3 men appeared. Well, they thought they were men. They were actually angels in the appearance of men. And they come with this news to Abraham. And Sarah was probably still in her tent, probably cooking or doing something. And the men said, listen up. It's time. It's time for the son of the promise to arrive. And Abraham heard that news, and he looked at his own physical state, and he knew about, Sarai's womb. That was already over. And thought I messed up big times in my life. I'm going to believe it. I'm going to believe it. What else can I do? I cannot do it on my own strength anymore. I tried to do it in my own strength, and look what I got into. It's amazing, this story. 1 year passed by, and what the 3 men, or the 3 angels actually, said over the family of Abraham actually came true. And the son, we know him as Isaac, was born. Isaac was born, and he was also circumcised as the symbol of the promise. Remember? That is what Israelites still do. As a promise, part of their faith, part of their journey with God, is that they circumcise their children at 8 days, because it's a reminder of the promise that they have. Right? A couple of years passed by, and probably Isaac, I don't think he was a toddler, but he was a little bit older by then. Not a teenager, I think, but he was a little bit older. And I can imagine, when you're Abraham and you were waiting for this child for 25 years, you treasure this child with your life, right? Wouldn't you? Can you imagine if you would get pregnant? I'm talking to the moms here. Next week it's Mother's Day. And you would get pregnant at the age of 45 or 50, which is very unlikely. But let's suppose that would happen. You would treasure that child very, very dearly, right? Well, that's what Abraham did. And so this is my beloved son. He's my, in Brazil they would call it my xodó. That sounds something like my little whatever. It's really cute. Abraham was so much in love with his son. It was so special. But then, we read also in Genesis chapter 22. If you read it up till Genesis chapter 21, it almost sounds like a Hollywood story, right? With war and with romance and with people and a happy end till then and everything. And all of a sudden Sarai getting pregnant and having a baby and everything. If you would hear that on social media or on 9 News or something, that would be probably called a fake news story. It's like, what are you talking about? Somebody of 90 years old having a delivery. What are you talking about? Well, back then, obviously that was an impossibility as well. Only God could have done that. So Abraham, dearly in love with his son, was a special one, the son of the promise. They were walking and God came again to Abraham and said, listen, Abraham, I need you to do something for me. I was like, okay, God, I need you to go with your son Isaac and go up on a mountain and I want you to sacrifice your own son. Now you think like nowadays, 2018, it's like, what on earth are you talking about? You need to understand that 4,000 years ago, human sacrifices were not so incredibly strange in pagan societies. Remember, Abraham was coming out of a pagan setting. He was learning what it meant to walk with God. And he heard that. It's like, well, I'm going to obey you. I don't understand what you're saying, but I'm going to obey you. So they went on this stroll together. They went up the mountain. He took probably some firewood and something with. They didn't have matches or anything, but they had it. And probably little Isaac was looking at that. He's like, Daddy, we're going to bring an offering to God. But where is the lamb? Where's the lamb? And what did Abraham said? Like, oh, you're going to be the lamb? No, that's not what he said. He said, like, you know what? God will provide. You see his increase in faith already? It's like, oh, God will come through somehow. I don't understand it, but he will come through. So I just imagine the scene. Abraham together with his son Isaac building an altar, putting the wood on it to make fire and everything. And then all of a sudden it's like, my son, come here. So Isaac came, like, can you please lay on this altar? Starts strapping him up with some ropes or something that he had. He got his knife, and when he was about to sacrifice his son Isaac, an angel intervened, said, like, stop. Now I know that you didn't withhold your own son from me. And this was accredited as righteousness unto him, unto Abraham. I think it's a beautiful story. An amazing story about faith. A person that struggled, we can relate to that, but also a person that grew so much in faith. And looking at this story, and particularly now looking also at Romans chapter 4, because we're obviously talking about this story in the context of Romans, there are a couple of points that I would like to make. If you have your little booklet with you, feel free to write it there. If not, you can just listen. I think the first point that we need to understand when we listen to the story of Abraham in the context of Romans is this, is that faith, we're talking about faith, right? And that Abraham is growing in faith. First of all, faith is totally relational. When I say, for instance, it's always difficult, Leo, I love. Does that make sense? Leo, I love. Well, it makes sense only when I relate it to a person, right? If I just say I love, you will think like, you love what? You love whom? Right? So I say like, Leo, this is very strange for men, right? Leo, I love you. He's a Latino, he can have it. The same thing is true also for faith. When I say I believe, you immediately think, what do you believe? In whom do you believe? What are you talking about? It's totally relational. Alright? Now the reason I'm saying this, obviously he's talking here about circumcision, and he's addressing this to the Jews particularly, because they were boasting in the fact that they were circumcised. They said like, we are Jews, we are people of the promise, people of the covenant, we have the law, and they were all proud about that. And then Paul said, so like, yeah. But let's have a little bit of deeper look into this whole story of the circumcision. And that's why he retells the story of Abraham a little bit. We, in 2018, obviously we have baptism. Baptism is something very similar to circumcision. Very similar. It is a faith, an act of faith in some ways, where we declare, it's a public declaration, where you die, get buried, and rise again with Jesus Christ. It's relational. It's an act of faith. But how often do I hear that people say, and I heard it when I was leading a teenager group in Amsterdam, they were saying something like this. Oh yeah, I believe. But baptism isn't that, like just a symbol or a ritual or, the man on the cross, he didn't get baptized, so do I need to get baptized? And are you saying that I'm going to hell if I don't get baptized? And what about if a man is on an airplane and he is evangelized by an evangelist, he turns to the Lord and all of a sudden the airplane goes down and he dies. Are you not saying that he's going to hell? We all get very technical about this stuff, right? But the thing is, if you read particularly the last words of Jesus, what did he say in Matthew 28? Go therefore and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them all the things that I have taught you to obey. He is not even saying here, go and be baptized. He says, go and be baptizers. Very different. In another verse, in Mark 16:16, you can even say, and it was Jesus, one of his last words, it's like, believe and be baptized. That's quite strong. It's like, what are you talking about? Do I need to get baptized to be saved? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if it's a love relationship that we have with God, why are we even asking sometimes very legalistic questions like, well, I don't think I need to get baptized. If Jesus himself had to get baptized, why are we even asking these questions? Now, the other side of the story, I'm going to play now the devil's advocate a little bit. All right? The other side of the story. There are also people, my mother is one of them. It says like this. Remember I told the story of how difficult it was for my mom to get baptized because of the whole family situation that was going on? She looks at it a bit like this. Well, I'm baptized. I'm okay. I'm saved. I'm fine. Doesn't always mean, I'm not going to be the judge of that, obviously. But the fact is that her life does not exactly resemble so much of Jesus Christ. You start having questions at least. Right? People sometimes can say that, I was baptized as a child, and I'm not saying anything bad about that. Please give me your good ear here. But what I am saying is that baptism itself, if it's not related to faith and to a relationship, you can go down under the water, it doesn't matter what age you have. It doesn't help you that much unless it is accompanied by faith. Make sense what I'm saying? It's very important to understand. The reason why I'm saying this is because faith is relational. Relational. And it is affirmed by our obedience. Our obedience. I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation. Actually, it really happened in some ways. Remember that I lived in Amsterdam, right? Now, what is Amsterdam known for? Let's be honest here. What is it known for? Yeah, I see the policeman already making some gestures there. Yes, what besides the cannabis and the drugs and everything, what else is it known for? Prostitution and all of that stuff. And Janine and I, we have seen those scenes. We actually know missionaries that go out in those areas to be Christ to those people there. It's amazing what happens there. But the temptations and the things that happen in Amsterdam are just really, like you can sense the spiritual heaviness over that city. It's really heavy. Now let's imagine that my wife, Shanini, and 3 children, they want to visit the family in Brazil, and I stay all by myself at home, alone, and everything. What could cross my mind? Let's be honest here. I'm being really honest with you guys. What could happen? I think like Mason's like, I think I'm going to catch the train, have a look. I mean, it doesn't hurt to look a little bit, right? I could. There's not an angel on my shoulder all of a sudden saying like, Patrick, what are you doing? Sometimes we wish for that angel, like just to keep us in check sometimes, but that's probably not what's going to happen. I could, but I can't. I could do that, but I can't. You know why? It's because God's Spirit lives inside of me, lives inside of you. And you know that, like, wait a second, if I go there, I will upset God in some ways. I'm in love with God. I love Him. Why would I do such a thing? Why would I do an act of disobedience that way? You see how different it is? It's a faith relationship. It's relational. So it's like I believe in something. We were singing about it. I believe in God the Father. But we sometimes need to go a little bit beyond that and understand that it's not just about the creed. It's also about the relationship that is so incredibly important. And not just that, it's also that we are actually obeying God. Remember the story of Abraham? He could have said, yeah, sure, I believe in God. But if his actions prove something different, don't you start wondering then a little bit about his faith life? I would. Faith is totally relational. Relational. And it is affirmed by our obedience. Now the second point that we need to understand is that justification is positional. Positional. I will explain this. Justification is positional. It is God the Father. Remember the trial that I was showing to you, and Janini also in the little video? It is God the Father as the judge saying, "Tak! Not guilty. You're free. You're okay to go. You're free. I don't impute the sins anymore against you. I have forgiven you." Why? It's because you repented, you turned around, and you started following me. Simple as that. It is positional. But it's not just positional. It is also something that needs justification by faith. Is something that also needs to be owned daily. Remember a couple of months ago I was talking about renewing the mind? When God comes in us, into His Holy Spirit, our spirit is being transformed, right? We connect with God, we are a new being. You can see it usually in people's eyes and everything. But there is a lot of work still to do. It's called owning your own salvation. You think like, what are you on earth talking about? Well, I'm going to read a Bible verse to you. Philippians 2, verses 12 and 13. Maybe you can project it on the screen. If not, just listen to me. It says this. And Paul is writing this in another letter. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to do for His good pleasure. You know, sometimes I'm a bit afraid that people's like, well, he believed in God, or he believes in God. But there is no working out of that salvation in, for instance, the renewing of the mind. You can sometimes see it in attitudes that people are having. It's like, whoa, is that a Christian? Are you sure? Because what comes out of his mouth or her mouth is anything but Christian. Now, I'm not the judge of it, but it is something that apparently needs to happen, and Paul is writing about it. It's like, work out your own salvation. Work it out on a daily basis. When you hold on to regrets of your past, or you own yourself certain rights to be offended still by certain people because they did something to you in your past, you're not renewing your mind. You're actually blocking everything that God can do. Because you pull out the plug of faith that God can actually transform your life. Remember? We are saved by grace. But it is through faith. It's a little bit more than that. We need to own this every single day. When you woke up this morning, you had the choice. You had the choice, I come to church, I don't come to church. You had a choice in many ways. Like sometimes you're behind your desk on a computer, and all of a sudden there's a pop-up of an image that you're like, I don't want to see that image and stuff. Every single day of your life, we have choices. And we need to work it out. We don't work it out on our own strength. It's still God that needs to do it. But we need to want it also. Like, God, I believe you can transform me. We need to own this. It's not just positional. And the final point that we need to understand is that justification by faith means that we can rest in His righteousness and live from that place. Remember last year I preached twice on rest? On rest? How important it was. I was coming from a very, very tough place, from a very tough time in my life. And this was one of the biggest lessons I had to learn the hard way. Understanding that when Jesus declares me righteous, I can live from that place. But how often do we really do it? How often do we really do it? Or do we sometimes say, like this voice that we hear sometimes like, oh, you dummy. Didn't you get it by now? Why are you still swearing? Why are you still doing this? This little voice talking into our heads. Nyak, 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 nyak all the time. When Jesus declares us righteous, we are righteous. We walk from that position. Not all the time thinking, oh, when I wake up this morning, I'm going to try to not sin. That is setting yourself up for failure because you're going to try to do it on your own strength. It doesn't work that way. That's not resting in God at all. That's trying to do it yourself. I am biting my lip, trying to be a good Christian. I'm sorry. Trying to be a good Christian, that is not the gospel. It isn't. What is the gospel? The gospel is, well, I am transformed by grace through faith, and He is doing it. And He is, working the will and that I want to change everything. He's doing everything. But I am the open vessel. It's like, yes, God, I believe. And by faith, He starts to transform you. I remember 25 years ago, when I came to the Lord, it was in 93, God did a miraculous change in my life. It was amazing. But if I look now 25 years till the day of today, the way I understand God today is a little bit different than what I had 25 years ago. I matured in faith. In many, many ways. In the content, what I believe, what I read in Scripture, but also in the relationship that I have with Him. It's very different. And so should it be in your life. If you look, it's like, I'm actually the same Christian, with the same little issues. You should start wondering, is God really doing something then? Or am I even allowing it to do? Or do I pluck out all the time the issue of faith in my life so that God cannot transform me because I want to hold on to something? Justification by faith means that we can rest. Rest. You know how difficult it is to rest for people? Really? They get overwhelmed by everything that life throws up at them. And then they come to God like, God, please help me, please help me, please help me. They run to God when the problem hits. I would suggest the following to do. Why don't you in the morning run to God first and like, God, you have declared me righteous. I believe in you. I love you. And when the problem starts to hit you, and they will, the gospel starts to become manifest in your life because God is already with you and He's already transforming you. So different. Sometimes the prayers that we have, they're all need-based. Oh God, can you do this, can you do that? Oh God, please. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what I am saying is that it is sometimes not based on knowing that we are righteous and that we can walk from that place called rest. Now I can imagine you start thinking, Patrick, you just said that we need to work out our own salvation. And now you're saying that we need to do it from a place of rest? Are you crazy? What are you talking about? It's both at the same time. Resting does not mean I'm not doing nothing. No, actually, I'm allowing God more to work in my life. Instead of trying to bite your lip because you might have an issue with your tongue. It's like, God, I need you. And by faith, I believe that you can transform me. And instead of trying to bite your lip, God is giving you a new grace. And all of a sudden, you don't have the urge to reply to that colleague that was a bit mean with you. Because God is transforming you. You work from the place of rest. That's why I believe that Christian ministry in this church, outside of this church, can never be done as if we are owing God something. We need to do something so that He is okay with us. You know how many pastors and Christian leaders suffer from this? They work. And not just pastors, even people out there, whoever. In a secular setting, you work. Why? To feel better about yourself? Maybe that God can be proud of yourself, of your own parents might say like, oh, good job, my son. You know how many times people do that because they want to have that affirmation from their own parents, let alone God? It's amazing. About parenting, sometimes we beat each other up or ourselves up. It's like, oh, my son or my daughter, she's not walking with the Lord. What did I do wrong? As if everything was on you. It's that it's your work to make sure that your son or daughter is walking in line with the Lord. Can you change your son or daughter's heart? Can you? You can't. My son and they're baptized. I have zero guarantees that they will continue walking with the Lord. I don't have them. What can I do? I can only model it to him. I can only show, I can teach, but that's all I can do. That means that the pressure is off from me. I am not the guy, or Janine is not the woman that's under pressure here. Not at all. Makes sense what I'm saying? It's from a place of rest that we can do all of these things. We don't need to work, doing things that till we almost drop dead, like, I need to have some rest from my work. No, we work from our rest. I'm going to tell you a final story, and I'm going to finish it before we serve the Lord's Supper. And it is from a story just to understand what I'm talking about. During the times of Napoleon, you know the Emperor Napoleon, the General Napoleon, in the time of the wars in France, in Europe, people were conscripted to become part of the French army, to go on war. But in a very rare occasion, you could ask somebody to go in your place. That was still sometimes possible. There was a man that by the system of a lottery was drawn, and he was said, hey, listen up, you need to serve in my army, in the army of Napoleon. Now this man, he came and said, listen up. Let's suppose that these are the French authorities, and he came like, listen up. I died 2 years ago. Can you imagine the faces of the people? It's like, what on earth are you talking about? It's like, well, the thing is, somebody went in my stead and he was shot 2 years ago. He died using my name and even my address and everything. Now the people, they started to figure out, they had their records and everything, and they found out that this was a true story. And Napoleon, this is a true story, by the way. It even came to the ears of Napoleon. He checked the whole records, and he saw that somebody took the place of this man that was actually conscripted. He was called in to serve, to come in the army. And he was absolved, no, you don't need to serve anymore, because somebody did it in your place. Now, relate this to Jesus Christ. What did Jesus Christ do for us? He died in our place. That's why we can rest. That's why we have hope every day of our lives. That's why God is transforming us. Sometimes we get it wrong. The whole thing with faith, exactly like with Abraham, we sometimes stumble, we make mistakes, things that go wrong. And instead of beating ourselves up, like, oh, I'm such a dummy. Why am I not here already? I should have been much further in my faith life already. And we pluck out faith, the tool, grace, to transform us as well. Why can't we just rest in this? Knowing that when we love God, He will transform us. He will do it. These elements that we have, I'm going to ask Pastor Peter to come here to help me, are all about a love relationship that we have with God, to the blood, to the broken body of Jesus Christ. You can take these elements as if it were just a ritual.